tell me a little bit about you. You came from Germany. So,
Yes, I was born in Germany in a city called Ludwigshafen on the Rhine, kind of smack in the middle of Germany. And I was born into the time of the Second World War. I was born in 1939. And I remember as a kid just with my sister running through burning streets and running away from buildings that had been bombed. The whole city was 80% destroyed by fire bombs at the end of the war, about 1944. That's when we had to flee. And my mother, I will always thank her for that. She took us out of the city just before the last inferno and put us on a train and went with us to northeastern Bavaria, an area called Franconie. My people are Franks from Charlemagne's tribe. And so we went to a very small village, 28 houses, and a castle called Manau. And we survived there with my grandmother, the mother of my father, who lived there on her own in a small little house. And I'm immensely grateful for not having to go through what other people had to go through in cities during the war. So I was relatively safe. I was outdoors all the time. We lived very simply. We survived by growing a little food in a little piece of garden that was offered us. We didn't have any land. My grandmother didn't have any land. So we had a little garden. We worked for the farmers around us, all friends of my grandmother. And we raised 60 rabbits and about 10 geese and chickens, and went into the woods looking for mushrooms and for edibles and brought that home. So we survived pretty well. I don't remember any time where we really were hungry. So we always had something to eat. Grateful for that.
yeah. And you told me once before that your mom brought you to that village. You say that the city had already been bombed a bit when you were there?
Yes.
Was that
yes.
kind of a scary...
Oh, very scary. And I remember one of, I think a soldier saw my sister and me running through the streets, and he tried to pull us into a safe place. And my sister was so scared, she bit his hand. And then we ran and we made it home, and we were safe, at least for that moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then I remember you had told me that your mom brought you to the village, but then she went back or something?
A half a year later, just I think before the end of the war, or was it right after the end of the war, she went back looking for our old apartment, seeing if there was anything left over. But it was all burned down. And she barely made it home. She almost didn't make it. She had to take a train, and but it stopped before the little town, before our village. So she had to walk quite a ways. And walking up through the snow, it was in the winter, she said that she was so desperate and fainted, and she fell down in a snow pile and really didn't want to wake up. But something told her, your kids are waiting, get up. And so she came home. She made it home to our village. Yeah, again, very grateful.
Right. And you lived there, so with your brother, what
4 years older than me.
was his name again?
Horst.
Host.
Yeah,
And your sister.
yeah, Hannelore. And she's 2 years older than me, or she was. Yeah, they both passed away. My sister just passed away less than a month ago, and my brother about 9 years ago.
Hmm. And your mom and dad.
Right.
So where was your dad during this whole?
He was in the war.
He was in the war. He was a
And
soldier.
we didn't know he had been kind of lost for a couple of years, I think, before the war ended. And so when the other soldiers came home, he didn't show up, so we thought he was lost. And we waited for him quite a while. And then I think a year and more after, we suddenly got a phone call. And in those days, nobody had a phone except the post office in our village. And they had those phones that you cranked up, and you had to put a big ear pad on. And I remember my mother listening, saying, "It's your dad." And we were trying to listen in too. And he said that he was coming home.
Hmm.
And so we reunited.
And what year was that?
Must have been 1945 or 46.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the war, didn't
Yeah.
come home and
Right. He was in French prison camp in those days.
Hmm.
And he was put into the mines to work.
Hmm.
Yeah, he came home pretty sad and bitter
Hmm.
from the whole experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
tell me a little bit more about the life in the village there. You said you worked under other people's gardens or
Right,
something.
right. In the fields with them, when when the harvest was on, we were always helping out, and in exchange got a little food. Or I remember when we harvested grains, we would all go through the field rows and harvest it, and at the end we were permitted to go through those rows again and find the little kernels and the little twigs that had not been collected. And we took that to the miller and had it made into flour, and that was survival.
And you were probably, 4 years old at this time?
Yeah, I was from 4 to 10. I lived in that village, so for 6 years.
What was the name of the village?
Manau,
Ma-
Manau.
Okay, is that how you
Manau.
say it in German too?
Manau, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Huh, cool.
No other way to say it.
And you mentioned there's a castle there. Was it an old castle?
It was. We call it not a schloss. Would be a castle. It was a burg. So it was a defense structure. And it was half broken down in those days. Meantime, it has been rebuilt in its beauty, and it looks very beautiful. It's called the Bettenburg.
And you used to play there or something? Or?
Yeah, a little bit as kids, but not very often. Very soon, during the war still, it became a refugee camp. So there were a lot of families there. I had one friend, a little boy that was in my class in school once I went to school there. And we became very close friends, just He was like my little brother, and I would walk with him back to the castle or fort, you would call it maybe. And yeah, he lived there with his family, and there were, I bet, about 20 families there stationed for a while. Later on, they were all transferred and moved on. Yep.
Oh. And you what was the house like that you lived in? Was it a little cabin?
A tiny house. It's called a Fachwerkhaus in German, which means with wooden beams and patterns and rocks and lehm. I don't know how to say that. Very nice, but also very simple. When we moved in, there was no electricity, and half of it was the place where the animals lived, where our rabbit cat cages were stacked up, and where the geese overnighted, and so. And then there was an entrance room. I remember that's where my little bed was, and I slept there. And then there was a kitchen in the back that was a little bit further lowered than the rest of it, and a cellar where we kept all our food. And then there was a second store that had maybe 2 bedrooms or so. They're small, but all very small and simple. And in the living room downstairs, there was an oven. That was our heat. A big fireplace. And we would go out and collect wood. And I remember my mother, because she was the only one that was the head of a household. There was a woman, everybody else had come back. And they went out together to gather wood for the winter. And so she was the only woman who went with a bunch of men out there to pick up as much firewood as they could, so we could survive the winter. It got pretty snowy and
wow,
and very cold there.
All right. And you said you went to school while you were there.
Yes. When I was 6 years old, I started going to school there. And it was a one-room schoolhouse. So I was sitting in the very front, and everybody up to 10th grade, I don't know, 8th grade or so, was sitting in back there. And my ears were always open to what the other kids learned in the back. I got smarter that way.
And you said your sister was in the class also?
Well, she was 2 years older, so she was 2 years up. Only later on, when we went back to the city, she started middle school with me, because she couldn't go to middle school in the village. So she stayed in the ground school. And so that was very hard for her, that she had to go with her little sister into the same class. So we separated very quickly. I took languages and art and science. Languages and art and history. And she took science, and so we branched off from each other. And she then later on became a doctor, a medical doctor.
Right. And you
I became a translator and whatever.
Right, because you speak a lot of languages now.
Yes,
How many languages do you speak?
I speak 4 fluently, and 5, 6 I can understand.
Wow. What are they? German, of course, English.
German, French. French was my second language. Latin, English, Spanish.
Wow.
And I learned a little Greek. I was in Greece for a while. I can understand Italian a little bit from my Latin, and also being there from time to time.
Amazing. Now, people watching this video, they're going to be probably relatives, people in the future watching this video to learn a little bit about the people from 100 years ago, you're only...
I feel so old.
No, you're so young, but can we say how old you are? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're 81 years old.
81, almost 82.
Yeah.
I have 2.5 months to go.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like a spring chicken, actually. You hike every day still and have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I know, because I'm with you every day.
I'm healthy and
Yeah.
knock.
Right. It's great.
So far, so great.
Yeah. So getting back, so when people watch this, they're going to want to know who these people were. So you were at your dad's mother's house. So what was her name?
Babette Reblitz.
How do you spell that?
Babette, Babettete.
And then the last name is Reblitz.
Reblitz, yeah.
Yeah. And so that was your dad's mom. And you don't know, your dad didn't know his dad, right?
Right.
Yeah.
My grandmother had a relationship with somebody, I think he was a teacher. And he decided not to stay with her.
Huh.
And so she raised my dad on her own, which was not an easy time for my dad. I'm sure. It was very hard, especially in those days. Yeah.
And he grew up, what city did he grow up, or what town? Did he grow up in that little village?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what was his name?
Emil Reblitz.
Okay, so that's your dad.
Yeah.
Okay. And then where did your mom grow up?
In the village over a hill.
What was the name of that?
Weichenfeld. And she was the daughter of furniture maker. And she had lots of brothers and a sister, two sisters, I think, but one died early. But mostly brothers. I think 6 brothers. And
do you know their names at all?
Oh.
And what was her last name at the time?
Bruckner, which is the bridge builder.
And so what was your grandmother and grandfather on your mother's side? What was their names?
Adolf Bruckner is my grandfather. And my grandmother, I can't remember her first name. She died before I don't even remember meeting her. So she must have died when I was 1 or 2 years old.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I never got to be with her.
Right. And do you know anything about ancestors before that, or where they might have all come from? Or
there was my sister was very much into searching our old history, and she sent me some papers about ancestry. So we know the generation before, or 2 generations before, but they were all in that area. So originally what my sister found out is that our tribe, if you so want, came from the east coast of the Black Sea. That's what she found out.
Okay. And aunts and uncles, in case somebody from that side of the family ever sees this video.
Well, the Reblitzen, we don't have any connection.
Right.
The Bruckners, yeah, we stayed in touch and we lived with each other. My cousins and I, in the days when we were in the village, uh, they lived in the little town Hofheim close by, and Schweinfurt, which was a city. And we got together here and there, and sometimes a lot, and played with each other. And
Do you remember their
we're
names
family.
at all now?
Okay, so the two survivors,
Uh-huh.
really just a few of us, is Hans and Heinrich Rückner from two families. No, Hans and Heinrich from one family, from Tante Gusti and Onkel Heinrich, yeah. And then from my mother's sister, Tante Grete, there is 3 children. Hermann, Margret, and Wolfgang. And we lost contact with them. They moved very far away to the top of the Rhine, the northern part of the Rhine. And I do not know if they're still alive this time.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to maybe check that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Did the war ever come to the village? Were there any signs that there was a war going on while you were there?
The end of the war came to the village. We were all asked to go into the underground wherever we could, and then
What do you mean the underground?
hide in cellars, which we did.
In the village?
Yeah, we went into my neighbor's cellar and were waiting there, and the what do you call it? Panzer?
The airplanes?
Military
Tanks.
tanks, and the tanks came through, and we heard them, and they were asking that all guns and any weapons be brought to them, and they lined them up. That's what I heard. We were in the cellar, so we didn't really watch it, but they were put in front of the tanks, and the tanks rolled over them. Destroyed them. That was the first experience I had as a kid with, the winners of the war. So
Right.
it was, they were Americans, and I remember later on, because it would come then from time to time through the village, and we would just run and say hi and say, wanna give me some chocolate? Was the words we could say.
Oh, you knew
beggars.
that? You knew that English phrase? You
I
mean?
don't know who told us that, but that's what we would run after them, beg.
And they had some?
Sometimes they threw something out.
Was there any animosity with the soldiers and the people in the village?
I didn't feel any, but I don't know about what the adults,
Right.
were talking about. Not that I know of. There was no resistance or no bad mouthing or any of that.
Right.
We were just all so in despair because there was no food around. We were so lucky. But you could really not get anything. I still remember the devaluation of our currency, that suddenly the money was put, 1,000 Deutsche Marks was suddenly like $1 or so.
Wow.
It just all disappeared. And I remember just playing with that stuff because it wasn't worth anything anymore. Wow. So it was scary.
Yeah. And so you said you stayed in the village there. Your dad came home and he stayed in the village with you.
Yes. Well, my dad stayed in the village for a little while. He, did whatever he could to survive, worked for the neighbors, and worked for my uncles, who had also, they were also furniture makers in the town of Hofheim, and also toy makers and so on. And my dad started making little toys, like little wooden beds, little
Like for doll houses?
yes,
Yeah,
little
yeah.
chairs and so on. One rocking chair, I remember. So that was all interim. And then he used to work for a bank before the war, and they called him back. So he went back to Ludwigshafen, where I was born. And no, first probably in Schweinfurt, and then later on Ludwigshafen, and worked for them. And then slowly brought us over to, so when I was 10 years old, we moved back to my old birth town, Ludwigshafen, and moved into an apartment at the top of the bank. And which doesn't exist anymore. That building was destroyed later on to make room for a road to the bridge.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So your dad worked for the bank? He was like a bank manager or something?
He was a bank employee,
Oh.
and became later on the bank director, but that was in the 50s or so. Yeah. Late 50s or so.
So you and your sister and brother continued school in the city there?
Right.
Anything you remember about all that was interesting?
Well, I went to that ground school for just half a year, and then we went to high school. We don't have middle and high, we just have high school. And I remember debating if I should go to women's school or to the gymnasium, which was was girls and boys. And because a friend of mine that I had made in the school, she said she would go to the girls' school. So I enrolled in the girls' too, but she then went to the gymnasium. And I always regret it. But it was also good.
Oh my. And so what did you and your brother and sister do after high school?
I left. That was the first thing. I got very involved with political organizing and understanding the war and understanding, how to not go through that one more time. So we were people that wanted to make peace and help people understand what to do and how to work together so they didn't have to be a war anymore. And that took me to workshops here and there. So I was a traveler in my last years of high school, which it reduced my notes a little bit, but it was also wonderful learning. I went to Paris, I went to different cities in Europe. And so when I graduated as second in class, or second of that year, and I was the one who spoke the, what do you call it?
You gave the speech?
The speech
Yeah.
for the graduating class. I talked my dad in allowing me to go to Bonn. Bonn was then the, what do you call it? the capital of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland. And he first was very reluctant. He wanted me to go to Heidelberg so I would be very close and stay home and kind of take the train every day. And I talked him into letting me go to Bonn, and I never came back. From Bonn, I went to Freiburg, then to Berlin, had a year in Paris. I got a stipend for a year studying in Paris and teaching at the same time a class in German in a high school. Which was fun.
Cool. And then what happened? You were in Paris. You got married, didn't you get married to somebody?
Yeah, that was a little bit later. But I started translating. I did a lot of translations, especially from French to German. And which took me to Paris every year, kind of in the summer. I spent a couple of months there and worked with different authors. Yes, and I became a journalist too, because my friend Henrich von Nussbaum, he wrote for some magazines, and I became an author too. Those days there is, we did for an encyclopedia a couple of articles and things. And different newspapers. So it was definitely an interesting time. But yes, we got married without permission from my parents. But I asked for the marriage because my mom had started to be very, very sick. And she lost more and more of her facilities of walking, then speaking, and so. And but it was too late. She died in 1967, and she was 61 years old. Yeah, and that relationship then didn't last. Luckily, we didn't have any children, so we separated in 71.
1971 you separated. But you had done a lot of traveling together.
Yes, we had.
You told me you went to Morocco.
Yes, a couple of times to Morocco. We went to Greece. We went to the Near East. Yeah.
And you interviewed
Italy.
a king or a prince or something?
The future king of Morocco I interviewed, and also King Hussein of Jordan. And many others. I'd almost forgotten about that.
Right. And you've also told me that you translated books, and
Yes.
or you worked for authors or something, or editing, or
Yeah, all kinds of language work. But I translated a book by Jean-Paul Sartre, a book by, or what was it? A play by Ionesco, Eugène Ionesco. Claude Ollier, a couple of them. So yes, quite.
great. So the big question is, how did you end up in the United States of America?
Well, I had just finished a translation of one of Jean-Paul Sartre, I think, and felt that I needed a vacation because it all had to go, it was under so much time pressure. I think somebody else had tried to translate it, right, and it went really bad. And so they asked me if I could do it, but it was under a timeline. So I stayed in the publisher house, Frankfurt, I think it was, and lived there for a while to do the translation. So after that, I was exhausted. Published, I still have the book somewhere. So I wanted to go somewhere special, and I had a car at that time. So I decided to go to the Mediterranean. And somebody had told me that there is a wonderful island there, Formentera. I said, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. So I traveled down, picked up a hitchhiker who knew a lot of people there in Barcelona. And I think we went together on the island, but then he continued his travel. And I stayed on the island on my own. And on the way back on the boat, I met Jess Richardson, who became my friend, my husband, and the father of my children. And he had gone to Europe to avoid the draft. He's also a peace-loving and peacemaking man. And so he stayed away, not knowing. And once his number was not called, which was a year after we had stayed together in Cologne, he went back to the United States and said, please come after. And so it took me a couple of months to get my things in order over there, and then I came over here.
And you ended up where when you came here?
In Boston. And we lived there for a while in an underground apartment, so you could always see the people's feet walking by. And then we decided after a couple of months, hey, why not go on the road? And we took a tent and 2 duffel bags and started hitchhiking west. And it was wonderful. From one moment to the other, we met so many good people that helped us out, or just enjoyed, company. And we spent, a lot of the time in our tents, in the parks and so. And yes, very interesting. And then the last person that gave us a ride to San Francisco was a military man, and he needed to do something for a while and said we could have his apartment. So we ended up in a little apartment in San Francisco. And once he came back, we went to Santa Cruz. First camped out at the beach, and then found people and a little community. They said, oh, we have a place, you can rent that. And we did that for a while.
What year was this?
I was in 72 and 73. And then we came back to San Francisco, and Jess worked as a school bus driver and as a taxi driver, and I worked as a substitute teacher, language teacher. So we survived. And then we said, we want to have children together. So what is the best way to make a living? And I don't know who brought it up, but we decided that we could do a restaurant, because I'm a very good cook. I remember cooking in New York for some friends who had a restaurant, and it was a great success. And I said, hey, that's what I can do. And so we went to the Russian River, which is north of San Francisco, looking for a place that we could rent and manage. And met some people in Monterey who had the village inn, and they gave us some pointers and we became friends. And then they called us back and said, look, we thought it over. We need a break. We can't do the hotel and the restaurant together. Would you take over the restaurant? And we said, absolutely. And it was a great success. And after 2 years, they sold the whole place, restaurant and hotel, from under our feet. And it was so high we couldn't even think of buying it. And another friend there had bought a place in Duncan's Mills, which had, the back had burned down. And so he had the bar and a little eating place. And he said, take it off my hands. I want to go back to the Fijis or wherever he wanted to live again. And we got it relatively affordably. And we had made a lot of good friends while we were doing the village inn in Monterey. And all those people came together and we asked them, could you help us rebuild that place? And they all agreed to work for food. So we rebuilt the dining room in the back and made the kitchen work again, and started opening the Blue Heron Inn there. It still exists today, and it still has a good name. And we made it a vegetarian restaurant because we had become vegetarians very early on, Jess and I.
Yeah. And your children were born in that town during that time.
That's right. Yes.
Wonderful. And then after the restaurant, you decided to you sold that, and
we sold that, yes. And we went to Harbin Hot Springs. Harbin Hot Springs had become my retreat space. With Jess, I made the agreement after a while that I would get every second Wednesday, I would get a free day from kids and restaurant and everything else. And so I started, again, camping out somewhere, or sometimes also renting a little hotel, but mostly I kept out. And finding the Harbin Hot Springs through some friends that recommended it. And so my Wednesday free days became Harbin days. And so when we left the village, the Blue Heron Inn, we decided to go to Harbin. So we stayed there for 1.5 years with our kids, and the kids loved it. We were very well accepted there, and we even were given more time than usual to be with our kids, so we could kind of release and relax a little bit. It was a lot of work. The Blue Heron Inn was wonderful while it lasted, but it was also time for us to have a little more family time with kids. And then we went to a workshop at Breitenbush Hot Springs in Oregon, and fell in love with the place and applied to become members and were accepted, and so we moved up there and stayed there for 3 years and did everything that needed to be done in the community. It was wonderful. And the kids grew up with a community school. It was very good for them.
Mm.
But when it was time to move, what happened? It was just time to move. And we had a friend with whom we started a buffalo ranch in East Oregon.
Wow.
Maybe that's enough.
So now the kids were living on a buffalo ranch.
Okay.
Wow.
Yes. And they built their wings with bed sheets and sailed down little hills and mountains.
And so now both your kids, they went to college, they're here in Berkeley,
Yes.
they have homes here and their
Yes.
own children.
Yes.
And
One
you,
is a lawyer and one is a Facebook manager.
right. And you and Jess at one time had separated and
Yes.
divorced. And,
Again, in peace,
yeah,
in good standing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we always stayed connected. We never broke really apart.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful
Yeah.
for the deep friendship that we have.
And at some point you went and lived in Hawaii.
Yes, for 5 years.
Yeah. And you were in your 60s maybe or so? Or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And how'd you end up back in Berkeley?
Oh, because my kids had kids. And they said, Mom, it's time you come back. And I said, sure. And that was 10 years ago. So my first grandson was born before that. So I came over from Hawaii a couple of times to spend a month or so here and be grandmother and learn. But then decided because, and the second one was on the way, I said it's time. And I found what was so good over in Hawaii through friends. I was advised to look into elders housing. And so I lived in a community there. So then I could apply here in Berkeley or in the Bay Area for housing like that, and found it and came over.
Awesome.
I've been here now 10 years.
Awesome. Great. And you also did some things with Native Americans.
A lot.
Is that during the Buffalo Ranch days or something? Like in
Yes,
90s?
even before 80s. Yeah, even while we were in at Brighton Bush. I started a little bit while we were at Harbin Hot Springs, met some elders, and then at Brighton Bush I reached out. Well, people came there and did sweat lodges and ceremonies, and I reached out to them and we became very close friends, especially some elders. They became my moms, my aunties. And then I went for a year and a half back to Europe, seeing if I could, if it was my destiny to go back into that culture, and found out no. First, I didn't want to lose my kids or grandkids, but it was also this was more my place. And so yeah, I came back and did a lot of reconnecting with my Native American friends, and did a lot of ceremonies, and did vision questing, and was asked by my Sweat Lodge friend, or Sweat Lodge chief, to Sundance if I would feel strong enough to do that. And it was a great honor to be invited into that. And I did it for 4 years and then an extra year. And it's still a very, very deep ceremony in which you fast of food and water and dance every day and pray. Every step is a prayer. And what we say is we dance and give of ourselves so that the people may live. And so I did that for 5 years. Then stayed connected and danced one other year for my Sundance chief because he was very ill. And that dance, I almost didn't make it. I was, so that was 2000.
Okay. Well, we had a little glitch with the camera, and here we are. We're back again. I guess we had a little commercial or something. I don't know what it was. Anyways.
Well, the last 15 years. So I went to Hawaii for those 5 years and came back here in 2010. Wonderful time in Hawaii. Met Hawaiian teachers, learned more of their culture, and also just learned to love the land. And hiked a lot, had good friends there. Hiked the mountains, swam in the ocean. Had a wonderful time. Painted a lot.
Yeah, you're an artist.
Yes, I've been painting all my life. It didn't come through.
There's one behind you there. And you want to point to it?
Right here.
Yeah, and we'll
mandala.
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
There's another thing. I'm gonna post these photos of some of your art. Added to the video here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for telling us about your life. Anything you want to say in German or French or anything to any relatives or anything, or any message for everyone for the new year of 2021 coming up?
Just keep your heart wide open and enjoy each moment of your life. Know that it's always a gift, and it's up to us to find the joy in everyone. And I must say, the older I get, the more joyful I get, and the younger I get. This is a document that my sister sent me many years ago, probably 20, 30 years ago, about the ancestry of my father that she researched and found documents for. And this document is called a confirmation to affirm that my father was of Aryan descendants. Aryan meaning the fascist way of speaking about the true Germans. And it was written on 10th October of 1935. So 4 years before the Second World War, when Hitler was in power and brought in that racist ideology. It speaks about my grandparents Eva Babette Reblitz, and the father of my father, Richard Rapp. They never got married, and she raised my father on her own. And before that, the great-grandparents and then great-great-grandparents from both sides. It's a document that always grips my heart a little bit about what my dad went through and our families went through in those years of the 30s in Germany. This paper goes back to my great-great-grandparents. And there is a great-great-grandmother, Katharina Reblitz, born on the 22nd of June, 1805, in Dürrenried, close by the village of Manau, where I then lived over the war. And Bruckner Georg, a farmer, no date for him. And here is Elisabeth Horn, again, no dates for those. But then for my great-grandparents, there is a Babette Bruckner, who was born the 23rd of May, 1841, and married on 18th of August, 1872, to Johann Georg Reblitz, who was born in 1838 in Manau. And so those two married and had my grandmother, Eva Babette Reblitz, who was born 17th of July, 1878. So my great-great-grandparents from my grandfather's side were a Kunigunde Kenner with no dates and a Heinrich Konrad Stegner and a Katharina Kuhn and a Johann Georg Rapp. Then it goes to my great-grandparents, Margarete Barbara Stegner, who was born in the 11th of March, 1860, in Frohnlach by Coburg, so a little bit outside our area. And a Konrad Rapp, who was born the 22nd of January, 1845, in Neuensorg, which is in the area of our Frankish region, and which ended in the birth of Richard Rapp, who was and it ended with Richard Rapp, who was a teacher and was born 11/11/1879 in Neuensorg, in the area of where our ancestors all lived.
And this person is your
My grandfather
grandfather, I see. And then this,
is my father.
your father. Okay, great. Do we know anything about the grandfather?
Only that he left my grandmother without wedding her and had his own family.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't know any more about him.
And then what's up in the
This is
left-hand
my-
corner?
So my mother's side. And I don't know much about my mother's side. At least I don't have any documents. So my mother's mother was Margarete Bruckner, born the 14th of August, 1861. And my grandfather, Adolf Bruckner, who lived to be 92 years old. Wer hat die schönsten Schäfchen? Die hat der goldene Mond, der hinter unseren Bäumen am Himmel droben wohnt. Sie tun sich nichts zuleide, hat eins das andere gern, sind Schwesterlein und Brüder, da droben Stern an Stern. Und soll ich dir eins bringen, musst lieb sein, du und rein, und freundlich wie der Schäfer und seine Schäfchen sein. This is a little children's song that I still remember from my time in the village. Here's a soccer song we used to sing at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon, where our family, my husband Jess and our two children Orion and Beckel, and I lived as members of the community for 3 years. It's a gift to be simple, it's a gift to be free, it's a gift to come round where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, it will be in a valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shall not be ashamed. To turn and to turn, it will be our delight, till by turning and turning we come round right. I danced in the morning when the world had begun, and I danced with the moon and the stars and the sun. I danced to the edges of the universe, and on this fine earth I had my birth. Dance, dance, wherever you may be, for I am the light of the dance, said she. I lead you on, wherever you may be, and I lead you on in the dance, said he. They cut me down, but I leaped up high, for I am the light that will never, never die. I am in you, as you are in me, for I am the light of the dance, said she. Wakantanka ahituye iche wechasha makakieloi Wakantanka omakiayo hey. This is a spirit song that says, Great Spirit, here I am, a simple human being on this sacred earth. Great Spirit, be with me. And I dedicate this song to my 3 beloved grandchildren, Kai, Akio, and Owen. I love you.